President Donald Trump froze federal grants and loans shortly after taking office in late January. Although that order has since been blocked by judges, it's left many people and projects that rely on the funding in a state of confusion. There are a few research programs at Troy University that use federal funding, and Troy students who need federal loans have been left wondering if and how they'll be impacted.
On Valentine's Day, Caleb and I took to the quad to ask fellow students their thoughts. Here, we asked Lofton Worthington, a junior communications major from Troy, if he thinks the freezing of federal grants and loans could affect people he knows.
Or friends could be affected by this. Right. If their loans are stopped and they can't get any finances to go to school here, then they wouldn't be able to get an education.
To get a differing perspective, we spoke to Kelu Gautam, a freshman psychology major from Nepal. So has this impacted you or any of your friends at all?
As of right now, I don't think so, but I can see it happening in the future.
Yeah.
I have lots of friends that are not doing well financially, and I can see them, hampering their daily lives.
We made our way to Patterson to interview Dr. Carlson, a history professor dedicated to research into 19th century American South, specifically the history of American slavery.
Our grant, we are focusing primarily on the Mobile National Cemetery and specifically on Black Union troops that are buried there. My initial reaction was because the motivation behind the freezing of the grants was to investigate the influence of DEI programs and to try to root out those programs that specifically focus on minority groups. Because we were dealing with Black soldiers, right, that ours would be one of the very first ones on the chopping block. I immediately put our program on a pause until things played out and we got more information. Got in contact with our program coordinator at the VA in DC, and within 24 hours really had heard that we would be okay. Everything's back to normal for right now.
When asked how he thinks the freezing of federal grants and loans could affect academia as a whole, Dr. Carlson had this to say.
Well, it's certainly going to be a lot more consideration into programs to see whether they run afoul of DEI policies or anti-DEI policies. The specifics of what those policies are, I don't think they've been clearly spelled out yet. And so we're feeling our way as to what we can and cannot do. Another good example, there's another research project that we're working on with Georgia State University, where we are using estate records of enslavers in Georgia to identify enslaved people and then to geolocate them on a map, so you could tell exactly who lived where, when. We almost think of it as a surrogate census for enslaved people. And the researchers at Georgia State just recently did an interview on an Atlanta radio station and wanted to give us credit for helping out, but didn't know if they could or not, because they knew that if they mentioned us by name, they might be putting a target on our back. Mm-hmm. And so for educators to think about research projects, not only do you have to think about how is it going to affect me, but what's the collateral damage that it's going to cause to other people who are involved in it? Do we dare teach people about certain aspects of history if it runs afoul of anti-DEI policies? Hopefully, you would think that school administrators would step in and provide some guidance. You would hope.
We also talked to Matilda Ziegler, a senior history education major from Shelby, North Carolina. She emphasized the importance of the research going on at Troy.
As far as history goes, I think if you don't remember, we've all heard the saying, if you don't learn history, you're doomed to repeat it, and that is somewhat true. I also think that it's good to honor those who have served our country, specifically with my research. We're researching, like I said, Black veterans who there hasn't really been much on them. There's a lot on white Civil War veterans on both sides, but there's just not a lot on people who had these very, very difficult lives. I think that that's important, just the same way any other history is important. And I also think that the whitewashing of history has pretty disastrous consequences. I think representation in a lot of ways is important, and we need to also remember the same way that we talk about the Holocaust, we also need to talk about slavery. We need to talk about the horrors of it. We need to talk about the immediate aftermath. I think there's this myth that like, oh, slavery was bad, but then Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves and then everything was fine. And that's really not what happened. And people kind of need to understand more the intricacies of the topic.